All right. First of all, a warm welcome to all the audience here and all the panelists. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. And we want to dive into really great questions here. The focus is a lot on technology. The focus of this event is a lot on discussions on technology and how we have seen that tremendous growth over past few decades. Uh, Globally and in India, and what are the steps that perhaps, or what are the lessons or steps or measures that could perhaps be very helpful in other emerging markets, growing economies, such as Pakistan also. All right. So I would like to dive first with the, I would say, the base or the foundation of this entire discussion, and that is how the tech world has shaped globally over past 2 decades. We've seen lots of ups and downs, starting from the time of liberalization, when we allowed countries, I'm focusing here on India, when we allowed countries to come in and set up their shops, and then we saw a boom of the internet era, boom and bust, and then again a boom that is booming. We see small dips here and there, but we know that technology is here to stay forever, and we have never seen this kind of evolution and innovation ever before. So if I may, I would like to start with Nilesh. Would you like to share your insights, given that all of us are investors here in technology, but given your background, I would like to start this discussion with you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm sort of an engineer first, still.
Sort of. Okay.
More than an investor. Investor stuff just happens.
All right.
I like technology. I like engineering. No, look, I mean, my bet is I'm 100-year like bullish on tech. People think, we've done all kinds of crazy things like over the last 10, 15, 20 years. The way I look at it, because I do actually invest across healthcare, across the so-called deep tech, whether it's AI, machine learning stuff applied to e-commerce, you name it. I see a lot of things in the pipeline that kind of continues to make me excited. Let's just say how technology has changed. The pandemic is a great example. The stuff, if we weren't for technology, we would probably be just sitting at home doing nothing. The stuff that we are all on Zoom. I actually worked at Cisco WebEx, which was sort of pre-Zoom with Eric. He was actually one of my managers at Cisco.
Then if it was a mobile less or technology less worlds, then everybody's answer would have been similar to Ovais, spending time with family.
Which might not have been a bad thing to do, unless you're on TikTok. But the
That's
point
tech
being,
as well. Yeah.
No, but the point being, yeah, I mean, it's not just just the fun stuff. Medicine or healthcare. A significant portion of my portfolio is actually in both digital healthcare as well as life sciences. Things the kind of progression we have seen on genetic technology, things have been happening research wise for the last 20 years, but the acceleration is why the acceleration happens because of that people can collaborate, people can send stuff faster and better. So I would say, there's probably not an area in terms of an industry or a sector which hasn't been touched by technology. I mean, I don't want to quote Mark Anderson saying software eating the world. I kind of think that technology is progressing the world.
It has spread in all the sectors and all the areas. Perhaps a lot of development that we see now in fintech and automobile was long overdue, I think. But that has been great. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I would encourage all of you to participate, and I would like to add a question to what Nilesh has already shared. So particularly when we talk about deep tech and software world, right? Because that's where we have seen the FANGs and the biggies of the world coming into the picture. Is there anybody here on the panel who would like to volunteer and take this question, that how they emerged and what do we learn? Or what would be the key takeaway from their growth stories? Ovais, Kirill, Ashish, Shariar, or Nilesh again.
So, let me give you my insights into Google. At the time, I was managing Intel Capital's portfolio for Europe, and Yahoo and Google were just the first few startups. I'm giving
Wow.
away my age. So, these companies are not that old, or at least Google isn't that old. Yahoo was a little bit older at the time. The reality of it is, at the time, I remember seeing the business plan very clearly, and there wasn't an emerging business model. There was simply a piece of technology that was doing searching, and nobody knew how to monetize this. There was indeed actually also the foundation of Intel, right, where I worked. And, there is still a museum back in Santa Clara where I worked for a few years. And if you go, there's a single business plan on a single piece of paper that's been framed, done by Gordon Moore. And it was supposed to be a simple transistor that was going to allow something to digitize 0101, but they had 0 applications for it at the time. But
This is, if you can share, which year are we referring to here? Around what time?
Intel was created in 1968.
Well, I think most of us were not born by then, but you're referring to that time. Okay.
Google came in around 93, around early 90s from memory.
Early 90s, yeah.
Right. And one thing is that the investor appetite in those days limited. Silicon Valley wasn't Silicon Valley back in those days. It was just exactly where probably Kenya or Pakistan is. But the thing is, investors took the bet on a emerging business model will turn up. And that's exactly what happened in Google's time. So, a lot of what was happening in the tech space was the enablement of an ecosystem, including Google, Microsoft, Intel, all working together to create what is now known or taken as granted, which is the digital world.
So I would interrupt here and ask another question. So while we were seeing these giants coming up, do you think this propelled the tech growth in India at the time of Infosys and TCS when they started to take over the entire outsourcing? Was it around the same time, and the growth that was happening in US pushed or propelled towards India, or India, because it started focusing on people, technology, 3 Ps that they say, people, processes, and products acquired? Or
yeah. So I mean, in those days, it's going to turn out harsh no matter where I do it, but it was just labor arbitrage. Right? The only reason, whether it's HTC or Infosys succeeded in becoming what they were is the cost of human labor out of India doing large-scale implementations was cheaper.
I would hold this thought for a moment, and I would like to go to Ovais and Shariar here, that when we're talking about how the growth happened in India, there was number one reason was definitely the labor focused and labor arbitrage, focusing on people, and you call it educate or you call it training them with the processes, which basically invited a lot of companies to outsource to Indian companies. And that's when the giants became even bigger, and today they're bigger names, and India became the tech giant. Of course, it started to grow more, but that was sort of a trigger as well. So while we know in terms of demographics and talent pool, there are a lot of similarities in India and Pakistan, where do you think that that we could play a role, or where do you think is the gap that could be filled in to bring that kind of growth in Pakistan?
I think if I were to jump in, the aspects of the Indian story that certainly I'm familiar with are perhaps labor as specialist and skilled labor in the technology space as one aspect, but one can't ignore the aspects around government policy and the inception of quality educational institutions that have become best in class globally.
Would you then say that there is a lot of opportunity for investments into education inside the country, or this is more policy driven, the initiatives that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, no, I was going down another road, which is the infrastructure around academic excellence and the ability of institutions like IIM and others to export talent. that corridor between India and the US at the managerial professional level is a significant aspect
Absolutely.
of the two-way flow of talent between the two geographies, because when you have diaspora present in market in Silicon Valley and so forth, it becomes a tremendous series of both role modeling opportunities to pull in more talent, but also the ability of that diaspora to contribute value back to the home country. So I think when you look at the Indian story, for me, you've got the Infosys type story, which is absolutely to be recognized. And then you've got the academic institutions, which have become significant professional talent export platforms. And then you've got, I think inherently a very high degree of managerial capability, both in the traditional consumer sectors and wider. So, and then on top of that, multiple other aspects of focus on technology, innovation and so forth, and an enormous captive population. So, when you add all that together, given also the macro political, relatively stable political context around the perception that people have globally as India is a large democracy in a stable place, you add all that together and you end up with a pretty compelling story as to why things have happened the way they have. Plus, on top of that, the generic issues of urbanization, rising middle class, growing GDP, inception of technology and mobile broadband. And you add all that together and it's a multi-layered success story.
If we have to focus on, and this is open to everybody, please jump in and answer this. If we have to focus on specific investments / investors / founders that played a significant role in setting up the stage for a tech era or the tech boom in that specific country, what are your thoughts on that? Who would that be, or what would that be that we might want to take lessons or learn lessons from?
Well, I can start. This is probably a big discussion, but based on my experience in India, and I lived in India for 6 years. I used to focus on India, but now I'm focusing on MENA, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. I have this interesting position of comparing different trends and trajectories of the countries in the area. So coming back to the question of who would that be, who are those enablers of the progress, technology progress? I would like to suggest to do like one step back, which is everything goes in cycle, and the stage which India is now. It's not a phenomenon of the last 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, not even 10 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like 2 decades, and marginally that was growing. And only 5 years back, I think the pivotal year was 2016, when a bunch of initiatives by Indian government were established. Like, for example, demonetization, which is not really a tech thing, but it was like a huge enabler of the whole thing. The
Make in India
Aadhaar
initiative was also started at that time. A lot of
exactly,
initiatives. You're right.
So
India has been very active into inviting FDI, for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only that, GST reform, transformed the landscape of logistics and healthcare just because of the taxes, and Aadhaar establishment. And Aadhaar as a national identification system is actually 13 years old program, which started in 2009.
Okay.
And exactly, Aadhaar actually helped Geo to make this huge success of pretty much immediate onboarding of like 400 million Indians and give them free 4G. So a lot of interesting things just happened during last decade in India, which were not seriously considered by some other countries. But India was doing great job, actually, with all the skepticism, with all the critiques the government had, still having, they did a great job. The enablement of UPI, which also happened around 2016, it was, I think, April or something. So this huge transformation things which allow India to reach this stage where India is now. And more than that, and let me just second what Ovais just said, probably not mostly about the IIMs, but mostly about IITs. So there are more than, I don't know how many IITs are in India. I think it's like 15 or something like that. But top IITs were the greatest sources for technology talent. More than that, at least our thesis was always that India is a very entrepreneurial nation, and because of the educational infrastructure and because of this entrepreneurial graduates with the good technology skills, wearing a badge of entrepreneur, wearing a badge of founder is an honor for youngsters, and this is why it's so popular, and it got so many interest, and in fact, at a certain point of time, for young graduates, it was mostly the major choice to launch something on their own, if compared to join Microsoft, Google, or Facebook. I still remember that Rajan Anandan, who used to work at Google, was actually complaining about that. So he was unable to hire fresh, young, talented graduates from IITs because they were pretty much into startups.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. And I would like to hold that thought regarding how startups contributed so much in the unicorns era. We've seen a lot of unicorns, especially in India, starting from the times of InMobi and Make My Trip. And Ovais, would you like to throw some light, or anybody else here as well can join in with regards to how unicorns or those kind of establishments have contributed to this sector or the country?
I mean, the one example I can cite is, which Ash will be familiar with as well, is the investment we've done in Big Basket, in around, gosh, I think about 2015 or 2016, actually. And I think the big differentiator there was the sheer depth of management capability. I mean, Harry Menon and Sudhakar and so forth in the founding team were not actually young startup people at all. They were at that point, probably, gosh, late 40s, early 50s, grocery industry, retail, etc. And I think what they brought to the party, which was really the basis of the investment and success, was a deep sectoral knowledge, a deep understanding of the Indian grocery value chain, and the understanding of the ability to leverage India, but to do so in a geographically limited fashion. They didn't want to get too big and to tackle too many geographies with too many diverse customer segments in one go. They were very, very focused around where they wanted to play geographically, what core categories they were interested in, and how the go-to-market and the logistics around e-commerce, grocery would work. So they were very unusual compared to most founders that we saw and still see. I mean, very seasoned guys and very, I guess, industry deep compared to most founders who generally tend not to come from the industry that they were operating in. So, the success there, as has been proven out by the Tata investment and the unicorn status of that, is really deep operational insight, deep consumer insight, deep supply chain insight, and very seasoned, mature operators. And you've seen, a little bit of carnage in that sector in India from other players who haven't succeeded, Pepper Tap and so forth. But, those guys have been a big success story by virtue of, I think, experience and maturity, actually.
Wow. And this is a very good example of the combination of B2B and B2C. I would like to take this question forward to Shahryar from the Pakistan point of view. We have seen emergence of technology and e-commerce, and with regards to, and because this is consumption driven, segments that we are talking about. So what kind of market for these kind of companies or startups you see in Pakistan, and what is the state in terms of supply chain or B2B or B2C with regards to how startups or companies are engaging directly with customers on tech front?
Right. So I think before I tackle that question, I'd like to walk the audience through a couple of trends or a couple of basic truths that everybody needs to recognize about the Pakistani market, and that's something that a lot of people have forgotten. Let's say in the craziness of 2021, right? Because it was a historic year for Pakistan. The global markets were flush with cash. All emerging markets were like really frothy, and the valuations were going through the roof, and people were getting a bit too crazy about what's going to happen. And now we've had, globally we've had a reality check in 2022. So I think one thing that we really need to recognize is that although people look at Pakistan through the Indian lens or through the regional lens, so whenever regional investors come into Pakistan, they'll be like, we invested in Indonesia and you guys are Indonesia minus 5 years, or we invested in Vietnam and you guys are Vietnam minus 3 years, or whatever. You're Egypt plus minus 2 years. In some things you're better than Egypt, in some you're behind them, and that's the lens that is used. But I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is that although Pakistan, we keep touting 220 million population and all of that, and that's almost like 1/5 the size of India. But I think one thing that we need to acknowledge is that because of low ARPUs, Pakistan in itself, and also because of the lack of the equivalent IITs not being in Pakistan and a severe sort of HR quality issue that we are facing while we grow the industry, I think the reality is that if we expect any large startup, well-funded startup becoming a unicorn just based on serving the Pakistani market, I think that is not going to happen, because that market doesn't have the depth right now to actually create a unicorn, unless maybe it's a digital bank a couple of years down the road. But if you're just talking about quick commerce, if you're just talking about e-commerce even, we don't see a Flipkart or an Amazon of Pakistan appearing over the next couple of years, and those valuations will be dependent upon a regional play. So if we just look back at history, Careem is a really good example, and sort of Ovais can chime in on that as well, where Careem started from obviously development partners in Karachi, but very quickly they were based out of UAE, and they were always a sort of a MENA startup, right? But the Pakistan part of the Pakistan validation played a key role and a very cost-effective role in them actually taking on all of those other dozen other markets, right? So whenever we look at Pakistani success stories or the first unicorn that will come out of Pakistan, it'll be a large play like Careem that validates its model inside Pakistan and then very quickly goes into the MENA region and Africa and geographically disperses and makes those numbers actually count, right? That is the kind of company that is going to be the first sort of Pakistan-based or based out of Pakistan unicorn, genuine sort of Pakistan-based unicorn, right? So an example is Careem, which was obviously Uber bought them for 3 billion plus, and Uber bought them for certain geographies, but also for the numbers. Then if you have another regional play, that is Zameen.com, which is the largest sort of property giant in Pakistan. And again, their parent group, EPMG, has diversified interest in the region. And that's why they've been able to sort of become a regional unicorn that way. But that was not just based on a property play within Pakistan. A recent, very sort of unfortunate example is Airlift, which was quick commerce and last mile delivery and grocery deliveries and all of that. They were one of the sort of fastest fundraising startups out of Pakistan. They were just before they imploded, they opened in South Africa, but otherwise their play was Pakistan only. And everybody was sort of seeing them as the poster child of the first genuine Pakistani unicorn. But because of various reasons and the market slowing down, they kind of imploded and shut down, right? So even if they hadn't imploded, I think it's really important to have a reality check on the potential within Pakistan and the regional play that is needed. So I think that's point number one. And point number two, I think, is that we need to realize that even with India's stellar record India is a totally different beast. If we try and follow the path of Vietnam or Indonesia or India blindly and just sort of say that we're, 10 years minus India or, 6 years minus Indonesia, and let's kind of do the same things that they did, or let's have a BPO revolution like Philippines, I think we would try to copy something that would not work locally very well, right? So we need to find our own path. And I'm a huge proponent of that, it has to be a local solution. And lastly, I feel that one thing that outsiders may not be aware of is that more than 90% of our industry actually is the same labor arbitrage that we were talking about that India went through in the 90s. And we've sort of gone through that path as well, which is kind of the bottom of the pyramid. And our tech sector has primarily more than 90% been a services-based sector servicing Europe and North America and Middle East and Far East, right? And the whole DNA of building your own products, building your own IP, even for the local market, let alone having a Zoho Docs or a Freshdesk or something like that, that product building DNA hasn't really happened in Pakistan until very recently, until the last couple of years, right? So that's the missing piece of the pie, which I'm really excited about, that the first sort of SaaS companies coming out of Pakistan, the first product-based companies out of Pakistan, those are the ones that are genuinely going to have a chance at being the first unicorn and also building global brands or regional brands, which are going to put Pakistan on the map. Otherwise, so far, it's been a mix of services-based and operational expansion, similar to grocery, last mile, Kareem, very, very operational heavy brands that we've built so far. So a bit of history and context, I think, was important, but also going forward, I feel that small teams that are punching above their weight and that are building really, really good SaaS products that can become sort of regional or global brand names, I think that's where our future lies.
But we need local solutions. Wow, that was very elaborative and amazing response. I would like to know from Ashish that you've had the experience to build into various emerging markets, and from your experience, even though we heard from Shehryar that we need some local solutions, and even if we have to replicate a model, it has to be customized to the needs, to the local needs or the local nuances with regards to Pakistan. But in your experience, if you have to suggest or come up with something that what has short worked in various emerging markets, at least some pieces that one may want to consider while investing in Pakistan or is a short plus, what would that be?
Sure. So Akhtar, when we set up Avishkar's activity in Africa, we had one observation, or a few observations, but one critical observation that we really wanted to leverage off, which is that by far, because of heritage of most of Africa, most of the emerging markets, there's been a tendency towards using technology and technology models that are adopted from the West to emerging markets. The issue with that is the underlying business models are catering in the West for a society that has a high spending propensity in general, vis-a-vis markets in which we live, where the average guy, if possible, will spend 1 rupee a month, right? I mean, there is just a very different consumption pattern. What India has done well, and I can't speak much on Indonesia, but I think a lot of Asia has done well, is exactly where Shehryar is talking about, which is customizing or the use of technology into business models that are serving the mass market at affordable price points, right? If you need to create unicorns, by and large, you need to be servicing your domestic market, because unicorns typically do not turn up by selling their product outside their core markets. There are obvious exceptions, right? Spotify and others. But in general, that is the rule. Now, India has a huge market. Africa is not Africa. Africa is over 54 countries, and within each country, we can't even get along, right? So the markets are actually quite limited. Just as, again, Shehryar's talked about, Pakistan is 200 million people, but what's the propensity to spend? However, what we've found that works well is taking models that are working and scaling incredibly well in India. Take agri-tech, you take certain levels of medical care, that can be transposed in its own way into Africa but you've got to customize it to the needs of the local environment. It's just the business model that you're borrowing, but you do need to customize it for local requirements. The other thing is you've got to be realistic, right? In Kenya, for example, or in Pakistan, or in most of the emerging markets, it will be very difficult to create unicorns. We just don't have a domestic market of that size as yet. And therefore, when it comes to the question of valuations, you've got to take that into account, because at the end of the day, we all need to make returns. And therefore, what you pay for these businesses in your respective markets need to reflect the market in which it's serving.
That's great. Thank you so much. I will continue with that. And probably Nilesh, you could add to this that as investors, we focus mostly on exits, that what is going to be my exit, because that's going to decide how much money an investor is making or pool of investors are making. Okay, so for these emerging or growing markets, when we know that policies are struggle, when we know that infrastructure is in the process, it's all work in progress. What is it that you would recommend, or the key things to bet on as an investor if I'm considering Pakistan and I know that these are challenges, but it has the potential? What are the pluses that to focus on, or what are the considerations to also keep in mind?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. But no, because I want to hit what Shaira and Ashish, since you mentioned the labor part, and I don't think we touched this as far as what happened in India, because I was one product of this labor arbitrage back in the late 90s, and then transplanted here in the US, because and the role of the corporates. So you have this talent, IITs, IIMs, but if they start exporting them, and if you all here and in Europe, then nothing happens to our home countries. What the role of these corporates like Google, Yahoo, Cisco back in the day happened was that because of this talent, these companies actually set up shops in Bangalore. If you look back to Bangalore, for example, in 2004, 2005, it wasn't like startup land. It was, just like the Silicon Valley picture that you might have seen about Oracle and Google, and this late picture from the 90s. It was actually very similar on Airport Road and, around MG Road and all that. And then all these people, who actually learn how to build products, how to build businesses and business units, kind of decided to go the entrepreneur route. That to me is a missing link. Please, gentlemen, tell me if I'm getting this wrong. And if we figure out a way to fix that, people know how to build products, whether it's for the domestic economy or the SaaSification for the world, etc. So I guess if I were in Pakistan, I think the first thing I would look for is how do I make it conducive for some of these companies to actually believe in setting up whatever they need to set up, right? Entrepreneurs are not just going to start companies because they just dream about stuff. They'll most likely fail, which is fine. But I think the success stories that come, they have this alumni trend from where they came from. And I think that's the missing link. I don't know if you all agree with it.
No, absolutely. Well said. And those were like really thought-provoking insights. And it brings me to basically building the India-Pakistan corridor, and how do we bridge the gap, or how do we propel the growth? And continuing with the thought that you shared, that is people first, basically, how do we make them or train them, or because the people itself are the product in the first place, and they are the one who generate or create more products. So one thought that comes to my mind, and you can all add where you think, we have Indian Institute of Technology, and many of us here mentioned IIT a couple of times, and maybe we need something like Pakistan Institute of Technology, PIT, and maybe the model could be replicated there, and people from I'm sure there would be a lot of investors like us who would be interested in such projects. But never mind, please, I invite all of you to take this question and share your thoughts openly. This is last question, and after that we would want to take questions from our audience here, but share your thoughts on this. How would you like to bridge the gap, or what are your suggestions?
If I were to
Go
kick
ahead.
off,
Yeah.
when we conceived this park launch series, the idea was very much to build those corridors and to build those bridges, because Ali and myself and others recognized that Pakistan has to sit within a global context. What's happening in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and India and Indonesia and Mexico and wherever else, allows us to derive significant learnings. And I think there's one overall point, which is, the responsibility in this park launch community has got to be, whether it's India or whether it's Nigeria or whether it's Kenya or whether it's Saudi Arabia or Egypt, what can we do to actualize these corridors in the form of actual tangible action? What do we do now? A webinar is one thing, and people getting to know each other is one thing, but how do we actually pull all this together in a way where these corridors become real? And that can be movement of talent, movement of people, events, content sharing, collaborative opportunities, investment, and so on. The whole value chain has to work. Now, obviously, in Pakistan and India, let's not dodge the elephant in the room. There's a tremendous history of political, military, conflict and significant differences of opinion and many entrenched opinions on both sides around we don't want to necessarily collaborate, cooperate, or do anything with that other party. And the reality is you can't get away from that, and to ignore it is missing the point. How do we, in the context of a very challenged 70-year geopolitical history between the two countries, what can we and what can younger generations do to ignore all of that and to actually say, that's all history and that's all baggage. What can we actually do to make it different? Because when you look at the rest of the world and you look at the behavior of millennial and Gen Z consumers and founders, you start seeing completely different patterns of behavior. They don't necessarily believe what their parents' generation believed, and they go off and do things without any of the constraint of conditioned thinking around race and politics and stereotypical thinking. So I think there's a role for younger people in these institutions to play to collaborate with each other. There are ways in which the Middle East could even be a forum, because obviously if Pakistanis can't freely travel to India and vice versa, why can't Dubai, for example, be a hub for collaborative opportunity between Indian and Pakistani companies? And especially the point Sherry was making around the geographic potential of Pakistani companies in a wider footprint of MENA and Turkey, I would suggest. So, the reality is you've got to grab the bull by the horns and do something about it. Otherwise, you're stuck in the same rut that people have been stuck in for the last 50 years.
Wow, very well said. Thank you so much for that insightful observation and suggestion.
Yeah, I would like to add. So totally agree, but at the same time would actually I'm still trying to kind of throw these ideas into the heads of entrepreneurs that I'm speaking to, both at Pakistan and India, that entrepreneurs should not have the borders, political borders or any other borders in their minds. So they should communicate freely. And at least, some of our portfolio companies in Pakistan already are talking to some of our portfolios in India. And some of them are actually participating in the call, I can see. The communication between entrepreneurs is like super important. And I hope that, at a certain point of time, we will have, instead of, or maybe not instead of, on top of Vaga border ceremony near Amritsar and, the India-Pakistan ceremony, the closing border and the closing opening border at Vaga, the ceremony between Pakistan and India. So on top of that, we'll have like India-Pakistani like pitch event when Pakistani founders would pitch would pitch to Indian founders. Indian founders would pitch to Pakistani founders. This kind of events we should have in mind, and we should contribute, and we should organize maybe at a certain point of time. I know that the pain is still there, and it's like very, very painful overall sentiment between Pakistan and India. But I think new generations of talent, both in Pakistan and India, are more open to each other and to collaboration.
Right. Thank you so much. And anybody else here who would like to add something to this? And later on, we can cater to the questions from the audiences.
Yeah, just to add to Kirill's point, I think Park Launch is actually planning a Shark Tank version for Pakistan. So maybe Ali needs to work on having a guest shark feature on the Indian Shark Tank next year as a first step to that. But totally agree with your point, Kirill, about most of the new generation ignoring the sort of old school legacies. I agree, and I think even in my network. Similarly, in our portfolio companies as well, there are a couple of very strong cases of a couple of our portfolio companies working under the radar with some top names in India. And the Indian companies are also very, very eager to sort of partner with Pakistani startups. It's just that, both sides are being careful because of the PR damage and just the sort of politics around it. But I think a lot of work is actually even now happening under the radar. Unfortunately, for now, the corridor between India and Pakistan is not through the Wagah border, but neither through flights between Karachi and Bombay, but it's actually through Dubai. It's actually through Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Silicon Valley, New Jersey, Toronto. Lots of companies over there that have offices in Pakistan as well as India with teams working together. Lots of VCs in the region that I know are sort of investing together and sharing deal flow. So all of that is happening. It's just that they're just being cautious right now, but that's always a good sign where it's business as usual for the people who are open about things and who want to work together. It makes economic sense. It makes sense to have regional partners. And we see a lot of that happening. It's just happening in indirect ways for now.
Wow, that's a very good start, I would say. Somewhere it got to start. This is great. One more question for you, Shahryar, with regards to the organization Pasha. Is there any close association with regards to policies or any Indian counterpart association with that? What is the scope of that?
Yeah, so I can't officially speak on Pasha's behalf since I'm not with them for the last couple of years. But even when I was there, and I'm aware of very close sort of relationships at a personal level through platforms like TIE and Open and all of some of the other sort of US-centric organizations that, again, the connections are sort of global. And I've seen senior people from NASSCOM from India actually work with a lot of people from Pakistan on policy, as well as from Bangladesh and other areas. So that's definitely happening. Lots to learn from the Indian policies, not just nationally, but state-wise. So Gujarat and some of the other places, how they've sort of transformed their tech centers. And we may not be able to admit it officially, but India obviously is a role model for all the countries in the region, and those policies are definitely a lot of them make a lot of sense for Pakistan as well. So that's already happening.
All right, thank you so much for that amazing session. Okay, so we've already started taking questions from audience, and for all the audience, please feel free to share what you think in the chat box also and ask your questions. So there is one question that talks about, and this is open to all the investors here, that what would be the typical expectation from an investor for a Pakistani startup, and if you can narrow it down to edtech startup, because we have laid a lot of focus on academia here and how that is going to play a big role. So any thoughts on this? Who would like to start off with this?
Yeah, I can start.
Yes, Kirill, go ahead.
So I'm personally very, very bullish on edutech all over the world. So I led a couple of deals in India. One deal I participated in my personal capacity in the US. Another edutech deal we did from the family office in Russia, and it was a it was a Russian origin story, but the bet was pretty much global. And I was like pretty much from the beginning of my Pakistani journey. So I was like, evaluating what are the players, what are the key players in edutech in Pakistan. Talked to a few, and just to realize that the market is a little bit too young, and there are some limitations that needs to be overcome somehow. So, and the major one is basically the technology penetration, which is the number of screens in the country and cheap internet. So it's not, it is happening, but it's not yet there. So this is, but I'm personally very interested in this space, and I will keep monitoring this space.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. So we need some telecom anchors here, apparently. Shahryar, were you wanting to say something?
Yes, just adding to that, I agree that it's still early stages in terms of edtech, but I think the context is that over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen investing booms in, for example, fintech, in e-commerce, in mobility, in last mile delivery, and all of that. So all of that has happened, and the laggard sort of verticals have been edtech and health tech. And everybody's been looking at deals in health tech and ed tech in Pakistan, but they are still sort of lagging in terms of their growth or their potential compared to some of the other sectors that we've seen. And now, actually, in 2022 and 23, there's a lot of interest in health tech and ed tech. But just to add to what Kirill said, other than the sort of technology penetration and all the ed techs in Pakistan trying to be the Baijus of Pakistan, because again, that's the role model. But my take on that is that the edtech that is going to be a clear winner, or the group of edtechs that are sort of going to surpass all the others, are primarily ones that don't just focus on K to 12 in Pakistan, but they focus on degrees that have a regional play. So, for example, O levels, A levels, Cambridge, those sorts of edtechs can very easily take the curriculum and take it to MENA in Africa and other regions with a bit of localization, and also cater to the expat community. So I'm seeing traction on that side in the edtechs, and also edtechs which within Pakistan are focusing on professional certifications, because they lead directly to jobs or upskilling, and people are willing to pay for them much more than they would be for K to 12. So whether it's chartered accountancy or something technical like a polytechnic degree or a GMAT or a GRE or something that gets you into university. And again, there's a major overlap outside Pakistan as well. So they validate within Pakistan and then very quickly grow outside Pakistan. That's the trajectory that I have a feeling will work.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. For all the entrepreneurs you're focusing on edtech, we at least definitely know one sure shot interest area that is upskilling. So people who are working in edtech obviously know the categories. So upskilling is definitely one area where there is a lot of opportunity, apparently. So I would like to go to Nilesh and Ashish. Having invested into various different markets, as in purely from an investor's perspective, would you be open to investing in Pakistan? And if so, for you to say yes, what are the things that you would like to bring in perspective?
I have invested in Pakistan. It's a stealth mode company. So okay. The answer is yes. Okay. I'm a little, my view on the region is slightly different. Maybe I'm more on the infrastructure side, whether it's IT, enterprise, and all that stuff. And e-commerce, logistics, that's really not my expertise at all. So I will lose a lot of unicorns there, but I'm okay with that. I'm more interested in what actually builds the country from the ground up. What pulls people out of this 260 million population. So I'm much more interested in not the private equity style of infrastructure plays, but things that could actually move atoms and not just bits per se.
Wow, thank you so much. Ashish, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would resonate what Nilesh said. I think it's all about the business opportunity, right? And at least from our perspective, I left the pure PE world quite a way behind, and it's about trying to uplift lives. The thing that we all have to remember is when I say such things, it doesn't mean that you do it on a subsidized way. It is you can be highly profitable, you can create large unicorns, and we have done that in India. But you are at the same time helping communities to come up. So whether you're in Pakistan, Mongolia, or Kenya, why would you care as long as you're doing that and you can create sustainable businesses?
Wow, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. All right, now here there are a lot of tech investors on this panel. One question that is open to everybody, that we have seen a lot of B2B, we have seen a lot of SaaS players booming and growing. What kind of opportunity do we see in that area? Is there an opportunity for SaaS aggregators or companies building up? Any thoughts?
So let me have a go. Yeah, I think so. I think we started off by a comment that I think Shayar and I both made, which was typically unicorns can only be created in markets where you're addressing in the market in which you are, right? So you create. SaaS is kind of allowing that equation to change, and therefore you are beginning to see, at least out of India, some, I wouldn't necessarily call them unicorns, but certainly businesses that are on a trajectory to create unicorns, whether they're in customer care, CRM solutions, or in fact in agri-tech solutions, right, which have an application which are global applications. And the beauty about these applications is that they've been designed bottom up for really emerging markets, and therefore addressing the price points which the emerging market consumers can look at. So yeah, I'm quite bullish that SaaS is going to change that equation because your go-to-market is changing.
Wow, thank you so much. I would just like to connect this question to one of the earlier questions that we have also received from audience, that with regards to exit multiples, what is it that you as investors have in mind when you look at tech startups and in the emerging markets such as Pakistan? What kind of numbers or ranges is it? Is there something that you could share for our entrepreneur audience here that they should keep in mind while working? They know that they need to at least build to that level to expect any great response from investors. Any thoughts?
I can start, with a quick one. So I think we have seen interesting stories with regard to the exit multiples and multiples in general. So I think one should distinguish between technology multiples and conventional businesses, which can be just offline businesses, or just just conventional banking, for example. And one should distinguish between how to what extent technology is the real difference between the company. As long as it's technology, it can be massively scaled. Obviously, the multiples on such business would be pretty high. If it's more into conventional businesses, offline, or very difficult to scale models, then obviously it's going to be lower multiples. But this is not a rocket science. It was like it's mostly understandable within entrepreneurs and and of course funders.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, any founder who's focused on exit multiples is perhaps focusing on the wrong thing. That's really not the point. That's for investors to think about. And even then, it varies, as Kirill is alluding to, significantly, sector by sector, situation by situation, geography by geography, inflection point by inflection point. There's no hard and fast rule. There is, to a degree, there's an underwritten business case that any investor will have, and hopefully you'll try and exceed it, because obviously the promise you make to your limited partners is to get to a certain level. But the reality is, As a founder, I wouldn't worry about that at all. I'd focus on building the best, most resilient business you can. I'd focus on market leadership, actually. And I think the single biggest formula for success in markets like Pakistan is just do everything you can to get to, significant market share, market leading status in the geography. And I think, valuation will derive as a result of, the moat you build around that scale, actually.
Very well said. So for all the entrepreneurs here, focus on value creation, right? Let investors focus on the returns and exit multiples.
Yeah, right.
Wow. All right, this is very.
I think Ekta, just to add to Ovais's comment, I think totally agreed that that's the wrong thing to focus on for entrepreneurs. But in terms of the benchmarks for the Pakistani market, it's kind of interesting that after the flurry of the last couple of years and the crazy valuations that we're seeing, some of these sort of highly funded startups were in paper valuation, at least, were kind of exceeding some of the companies that were listed on our public stock exchange, right? And people were just kind of wondering that, what's the exit strategy going to be over the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years? So I think locally, because we don't have the equivalent of the top 4 sort of Infosys, Tatas here that can acquire a company for, let's say, $50 million or something. And Careem being bought for $3 billion was a huge sort of milestone for us. And it's created a total cultural change in terms of the ecosystem and the Careem alumni going on, the Careem mafia sort of going on to create this new wave of startups. But I think what Pakistan needs and what most probably will happen realistically and which will benefit both the entrepreneurs and the investors is that instead of a one-off Careem being sold for $1 billion or $3 billion, we need 10 companies being acquired in the region for 100 million each. And we need 50 companies being acquired for 50 million each. And we need 100 companies going to the local sort of stock exchange and doing these small IPOs for 10, 15 million, right? That whole culture being built over the next 3 to 5 years is going to plant 1,000 flowers for us. And that is going to be much more sustainable. So that would be the ideal outcome, in my opinion, in terms of exit.
Wow, thank you so much.
And this is exactly what happened in India, right? So India has at least 3 to 4 cycles of this waves of startups, and already entrepreneurial community has a lot of second, third, and even fourth time entrepreneurs. And it's not only contributing talent into the ecosystem because more number of companies, more C-level executives, more next level executives are in the ecosystem who actually see the founders, see the C-suite working, and the whole ecosystem is benefiting not only from talents but also from early founders who are receiving good ESOPs and start reinvesting as angels into the ecosystem. And just one great example is of course, and it's an outlier, Kunal Shah, who sold his first company FreeCharge for I think 450 million, and now he's the founder of Cred, which is around 7 billion in market cap. So he is himself is the most active investor in India. So he's writing, I think my personal guess, he is writing 20 to 30 checks a month himself. I mean, he has a separate office and he is writing this kind of checks. And this is a huge validation and huge support for first-time founders who are having, a big sponsor, a big technology celebrity in the cap table, which allows him to raise even more funds from the community, from the new investors.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think we are coming very close to our session end, but there is one very interesting question. Is it possible to offer IIT to developing region through EdTech? Perhaps we can be more focused. Is it possible to offer something like that in place like Pakistan? Or rather, let me rephrase it. How is it possible to offer IIT-like high-end kind of education through EdTech? Yes, please.
I have an answer right away. So we invested in company Newton School. So sorry about the kind of a native integration or advertising, but it's a good example of neo university. So it's basically the company started as ISA, income share agreement space, and with all the critique of ISA, still they managed to grow and pivot towards the neo university. So what we already touched this in our early discussions here, so that upskilling, reskilling is a huge trend, and if added with the cohort-based learning and basically orient all these courses towards like real professions, that's basically the trend. And technology companies are already actually eating the lunch of the big universities. So IIT maybe not even competitive enough now, because they are like such a behemoths. They cannot catch up with technology companies.
Wow, thank you so much. Ovais, were you wanting to add something?
No, I'm fine. I'm good. I think you're probably nearing the end of the session.
Yes.
I think, but I won't protract it.
All right. Well, there are still lots and lots of questions on the chat that I can see, but we do want to close this session and leave a lot of discussions for upcoming sessions. Once again, I want to thank you all, but I would like all of you to take this opportunity and share your thoughts or any closing remarks for this corridor or anything that you would like to share here. We start with Ovais. How about that?
Yeah, no, I think it just comes back to that point around, what can we do actively to reinforce and build a corridor between Pakistan and India, and ignore the politics, ignore the history, as everyone else was alluding to, and what can we actually do to take steps? And that's the whole vision around this corridor series. And I think Pakistan and India is an acute example of the greatest impact we can create is actually that particular corridor.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Ashish.
I mean, to be honest, I think what Ovais said is absolutely right. In certain parts of Pakistan, you're just 1 meter away from India, right? So it's kind of so close yet so far. So I think the opportunity is there. I completely hear the issues around politics, etc. But I think from every other aspect, the cultural aspects, the language aspects, you name it, there's so much common stuff between the countries that I see a lot more upside if we could figure out how to make this work.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much. Kirill.
Yeah, I think it's just very early days, and we should all be we should all think strategically. We should all think like super long term. It's not about next 3 years, next 5 years. It's about like decades. And most people would not plan in terms of decades. It's like it's 10, 15 and more years when we will see something like really really exciting. So resilience and rigor.
Wow. Shariar, how about you go next?
Yeah, I think just quickly echoing what everybody says, I think the new generation has kind of had enough of the historical baggage, and they're rightfully ignoring all of that and just going ahead and building new bridges, right? So whether they're virtual until the physical can be made, I see a lot of work happening. People are taking it cautiously, one step at a time, but I'm an eternal optimist about Pakistan in the long run. And as Kirill said, it's the long game that we have to plan. So that definitely seems all positive to me.
Beautiful. Nilesh?
No, I mean, I'll just say two things. One is, entrepreneurs, you just, let's just keep building. I mean, there's no other choice, right? We can talk about a lot of things, but if you're not building, nothing is happening. And then, like Shariar said, let's just keep doing it for the long run. I think, short-sightedness is not how India or US or Silicon Valley here was built. It was built over 20, 30 years. That's probably what I would focus on, whether I'm on this side or that side.
Wow, very well said. Thank you so much. And here, even
one thing, Hector, sorry to interrupt. I think
Go ahead.
coming back to the original series that we did, a program we did earlier, I think, you know, the economic bloc between Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh is uniquely powerful. And if we could help create a technology corridor between those three countries with a due regard for the sovereignty of each, but with free flow of talent, knowledge, and technology between those three countries, I think that's a unique vision and something we should aspire to.
you are setting up the stage for the next discussion already, always. So Ali and the team here, you already got the next topic. Absolutely, there needs to, we still need a lot of thoughts going into that direction and coming to concrete solutions. But I do think that here we are 6 people. It also reflects a sample of the entire population. And this only makes me positively and strongly believe that the world is coming together towards building some bigger things and making a huge impact, like we all came together from wherever we are. So this is great, and I hope we all continue to do this and many more people join us in this journey of bridging the gap. Thank you so much, everybody, and see you soon again.
See you later.
Bye.